All right, so today we're heading to South Africa, to Durban specifically, and we're looking into this whole Durban chopping scandal thing.
Yeah.
And we've got an investigative piece here that we're going to kind of dive into and see what's going on, see if we can extract, the important details.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, this should be pretty interesting.
yeah, this should be fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I think this one's going to be have some legs.
It does. It does indeed. And I think that, the material that we've gone through really points to some potentially broader issues
Oh yeah.
that are at play here that go beyond just, individual trees.
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't just a couple trees here and there. We're talking about something that could be pretty systematic,
Right.
and organized.
Yeah.
So let's kind of break down how this whole thing is allegedly working.
Okay.
We'll start with this idea of a permit scam.
All right.
So the way it seems to be working is that developers will file these reports that say, "Oh, this tree is dangerous.
Right.
It needs to be removed."
Huh?
Um,
Yeah, that seems to be kind of the initial step or the initial move based on the material that we've seen.
yeah.
And, obviously designating a tree as dangerous is a very serious thing.
Right.
It's not something to be taken lightly. And it really, it needs to be a valid reason for removal. And that's where the concern comes in. Because
Yeah.
it seems like potentially there isn't a thorough check
Exactly.
on the validity of these claims.
It sounds like these approvals are just rubber stamped and flying through.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of oversight happening.
Yeah, and that's a really critical vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because when you have a system where the burden of proof
Right.
for tree endangerment falls primarily on the developer, that's a situation that could be ripe for exploitation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
And here's where it gets really interesting. This piece talks about how these trees that are being cut down
Right.
are then being listed as new plantings
Yeah.
for development sites on other projects.
So it's like they're just taking these mature trees
Yeah.
and they're just like, oh, this is a brand new tree
Right.
we're planting on this site.
It's a shell game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very, very high level of deliberate manipulation.
Yeah.
If that's indeed what's happening. I mean,
Yeah.
that suggests a pretty calculated effort to appear compliant on paper, all the while clearing out established trees for development.
Yeah, it's a real problem. And then I think it, points to the overall integrity of this whole reporting process
Absolutely.
and whether or not there's any oversight at all.
Yeah, I mean, it raises questions about the effectiveness of the oversight mechanisms that are in place within these city departments.
Okay, so we've got this permit scam going on, and then the investigation doesn't just stop at the trees themselves.
Right.
They decide to follow the money,
Uh-huh.
which is always a good idea when you're looking into a scam.
Yeah, I mean, follow the money. That's how you really get to the bottom of things.
Right.
A lot of the time.
So what kind of financial connections are they looking at here?
Well, so the material we've gone through really seems to highlight the flow of funds
Okay.
that originated from accounts associated with various construction companies.
Yeah.
And they seem to be particularly interested in these payments that were marked as consulting fees
Oh, okay.
that were directed towards certain city officials.
Interesting.
And that's, consulting fees is one of those things that's often a bit of a red flag because
Yeah.
it can really lack transparency
Mhm.
and it can make it difficult to trace the true nature of the payments.
Right. It's just a nebulous term.
Exactly.
You could hide all kinds of things under.
Right.
So essentially, they're looking at these consulting fees and saying, well, is this just a way to funnel money
Right.
to these officials to get them to look the other
That's
way?
basically it with these permits.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that investigators are likely going to be trying to determine
Right.
is, is there a quid pro quo here?
Are these legitimate consulting fees or is this something else?
Huh.
And the piece does mention some pretty interesting details that suggest something might not be quite right.
Yeah, there's this mention of individuals suddenly acquiring
Right.
luxury vehicles.
Yeah. Now, obviously, that's not proof of anything
Right,
on its own.
right.
But when you consider it in the context of all these other allegations,
Mhm.
and when you consider the reported financial transactions,
Yeah.
It definitely raises some eyebrows.
Yeah, it definitely raises some suspicions.
Yeah, it warrants closer scrutiny,
Right.
which is presumably what that forensic report would provide. So,
Yeah.
forensic accounting, you're looking at financial transactions, documentation,
Mm.
really trying to uncover patterns of suspicious activity
Yeah.
and potentially link these payments to specific approvals or actions.
And this forensic report keeps coming up.
Right.
So it sounds like this is a really important piece of evidence
Yeah.
that's going to shed light on the whole scope of these financial dealings.
Well, that seems to be where a lot of the details of the financial trail are
Yep.
documented.
Right.
And, potentially it's the evidence that connects the tree removals to the illicit gains
Right.
that those individuals may have received.
So we've got all this going on, and then the investigation takes another turn, and they start looking at satellite imagery
Okay.
to kind of back up these claims of tree loss.
Mhm.
And it's pretty striking what they found.
It's really interesting to see that level of, visual confirmation of
Yeah.
the actual decrease in tree cover
Right.
in these areas.
And they specifically highlight this Glenwood neighborhood.
Right.
And the numbers are pretty stark. 2018, they're showing 43% tree cover.
Okay.
2021, that drops to 28%.
Wow.
And then by 2024,
Okay.
only 19% tree cover left.
That's a massive drop.
Huge drop.
Yeah.
And it's over a relatively short period of time.
Right.
We're talking 6 years here.
And I think that really, for people who aren't familiar with the area, just to give you a sense of that,
Yeah.
you're going from nearly half of the area covered by trees to less than a fifth.
Right.
And that's a huge visual change.
It's a huge visual change.
And it really directly supports those claims of systematic removal.
It's hard to argue with that kind of data.
It's very difficult to argue with that
And
because you can see it.
You can see it right there.
Yeah, you can see it plain as day.
And so this really gives us a good timeline. If these permit applications are being filed around this time,
Right.
and then we see the tree canopy shrinking,
Uh-huh.
it really puts those two things together in a way that's hard to ignore.
And I think that that's really important because it moves beyond individual stories or anecdotes.
Mhm.
And it provides, quantifiable data
Yes.
that really supports this narrative.
So it's not just hearsay. Yeah,
Exactly.
actual evidence.
It's evident.
Okay, so we've talked about the scam, we've talked about the money, we've talked about the evidence from satellite imagery,
Yeah.
but there's another element here that's really important, and that's the human element.
Right. The people involved.
The people involved.
Yeah.
And specifically, they were able to get an interview with a whistleblower from the Parks Department,
Oh, wow.
which, to me, this is just a huge act of bravery
It is.
because I can't imagine the kind of pressure
Yeah.
that someone in that position would be under.
And I think the fact that the interviewee is masked really speaks volumes
Absolutely.
about the potential fear of reprisal
Yeah.
that they might be facing for speaking out.
It makes you realize this is serious stuff.
It is.
It's not just, oh, I'm going to report this and everything will be
Yeah.
fine. This person's livelihood could be on the line.
Absolutely, and their family's well-being.
Absolutely.
So it's definitely something to think about.
So what kind of pressure was this whistleblower under?
Well, according to what we have, the whistleblower claimed to have been directly threatened,
Oh, wow.
being told to approve these tree removals,
Mhm.
and the explicit threat was that their children will lose access to their school fees.
That's awful.
Yeah, I mean, that is a deeply disturbing allegation.
Yeah.
It suggests, a level of abuse of power,
Yeah.
and a complete disregard for the well-being of people who might object.
Yeah.
And it's really sobering to hear that,
It really is.
to hear the personal risks
Yeah.
that are involved with people trying to expose this.
And the whistleblower had evidence to back up their claims.
Yeah.
They actually
Yeah.
said that they had supporting documents.
They did, but unfortunately, the audio of the testimony cuts off
Oh, wow.
at that point in the investigative piece.
So we don't know what else they were going to say.
We don't know exactly what those documents might contain.
Man, that's so frustrating.
It really is, and it kind of leaves you hanging a little bit.
It does, yeah.
It raises questions about why the testimony was cut short.
Right. What else did this person know?
Exactly.
And were they prevented from speaking?
Right.
You
And
know.
I think it highlights, the sensitive nature of this topic
Yeah.
and the potential risks involved in uncovering this type of alleged corruption.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've got all this going on. This really feels like a pretty bad situation.
Yeah.
But there is a bit of a bright spot in all this.
Okay.
And that's the example of the Berea Residents Association.
Yeah.
they decided they weren't going to take this lying down.
Right.
And they actually got organized and did something about it.
Mm.
So what were they able to accomplish?
Well, so it seems like they adopted a really proactive
Okay.
and multifaceted approach.
Okay.
They first off demanded that public hearings be held for any proposed tree removals.
So they're saying no more backroom deals.
Exactly.
We want this out in the open.
It needs to be transparent.
Yeah.
We need to have community input.
And this is so smart
Yeah.
because it forces accountability.
Right.
You know, if everything's done behind closed doors, then it's easy to, do whatever you want.
Yeah, and I think that's a big takeaway here.
Yeah.
For, listeners in other cities.
Yeah.
Is that transparency
Transparency.
is key.
Yeah.
Bringing those decision-making processes into the public domain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so they've got these public hearings. What else did they do?
Well, they went a step further. They actually installed 247 tree monitoring cameras
Wow.
in their area.
Really? So they're like, we're watching you.
Yeah, basically.
And they can't just sneak in the middle of the night?
Yeah. And it's really interesting because this creates a direct and verifiable record of any tree-related activities.
Yeah.
It's a deterrent
Yeah.
because people know they're being watched.
Yeah.
And it also provides crucial evidence if something does happen.
I love that. That's fantastic.
It's a great idea.
It's a great idea. And it sounds like their efforts paid off.
They did. The source reports that they were able to win a substantial sum in reparations
Okay.
for illegal tree removals that had already taken place.
How much are we talking?
2.1 million rand.
Wow. That's a significant amount of money.
It is, and I think that shows that organized and persistent community action can actually hold those responsible to account.
Right.
And can secure compensation for environmental damage.
Yeah, so this is a really great example of how citizens can actually make a difference.
Absolutely.
Even when you're up against something that feels as big as corruption.
Right. It shows the importance of community engagement,
Yes.
vigilance,
Yeah.
and really just being willing to stand up and challenge decisions
That's great
that
to
are
see.
going to negatively impact your neighborhood.
So to kind of wrap this up,
Okay.
we've gone through this whole Durban chopping scandal thing. We've looked at this alleged permit scam,
Right.
the money trail, these consulting fees,
Oh, yeah.
these luxury car purchases.
Right.
We've got satellite evidence of tree loss.
Right.
We've got a whistleblower who's facing threats.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have this really great example of community action.
Yeah.
So this is obviously a very serious situation.
It is. And, it really raises some fundamental questions
Yeah.
about the development process, the accountability of officials,
Yeah.
and how we actually protect these urban forests,
Right.
within these planning processes.
Yeah. Are we doing enough
Exactly.
to ensure that, our cities are green and livable?
And I think that's a question for all of us listening.
Absolutely.
What about where you live?
Yeah.
What about the urban forests in your community?
Yeah. Are there transparent processes in place for these development projects?
Right.
Are the environmental regulations being enforced?
Are people being held accountable?
Are people being held
And
accountable?
what role do you play?
What role do you play?
Yeah. In protecting these spaces.
Right. It's a really important question for all of us to consider.
It is.
Because we're all impacted by this.
Yeah. And I think Durban, what's happening there is
Yeah.
just a really stark reminder
Yeah.
of the importance of vigilance
Yeah.
and the importance of being proactive
Yeah.
in ensuring that we're protecting these urban spaces.
And I think it's a good reminder that we all have a role to play.
We do in this.
We absolutely do.
Well, thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Until next time.
Take care.
See you later.